Welcome back to Texas Liberty Podcast. I'm Clark Patterson, and along with Ted Brown, tonight I'll be speaking with ter Maat, who's a presidential candidate for the Libertarian nomination this year in 2024. And also, we'd like to welcome also Jim Turney, who's also working with this campaign. So let me just start out, Mike, by, of course, asking you your history in the Liberty movement, how you got involved, how long you've been involved, and again, if there was any particular event either nationally or maybe even in your personal life, something that happened to you personally that caused you to see the importance of liberty in the world.
Sure, I appreciate that. Thank you for having me on, Clark and Ted, both of
Sure.
you guys. It's a joy to be with you. And thank you for having me on tonight in particular. I know that we're all getting ready for the convention. I know you want to talk about that too. So I look forward to your questions. I'll follow your lead regarding your curiosities. Look, I grew up as a Republican. I was in commercial finance, coming out of business school and engineering school. Went back to graduate school. I was at George Washington University, a very free market oriented graduate program, which put me in good stead, of course, and set me up for a lifetime of understanding the world through a libertarian point of view. I got into politics a little bit early on. I went to work for the White House as an economist in the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, which those of you in the audience with some gray hair will remember was the president who had famously said, when they come looking for taxes, I'll say, read my lips, no new taxes. And then he went back on that promise and did eventually agree to new taxes, which, as you might imagine, for a young, fiscally conservative economist, was a bit of an eye-opening moment, right? You had to wonder, is the Republican Party really what I thought it was? Is my boss's boss really who I thought he was? So that was one bit of a turning point for me. I went into the business in Washington, D.C., of professional advocacy. I championed free markets and deregulated environments, mostly in the financial services industry for a decade. I had my own business in strategic consulting and education for executives, a business that we had launched and eventually merged into another big company. I taught economics at 3 different universities over the years. One of the moments that I remember best during that time, you asked me if there was a turning point. I can remember already being a little bit on the outs with the Republican Party, but I remember a good friend of mine, he's a part of our campaign to this day. He was explaining to me the Republican Party's phenomenon of being upset about gay marriage. And I was like, I can remember the discussion. I was like, explain to me why I should care about this, right? And I didn't mean it in a snarky, argumentative way. I honestly meant, like, what's all the what is the big deal about? What's the hubbub? Why is it that the Republican Party is all upset about this? Ostensibly, we were still members of the Republican Party. So I had this, not completely irrelevant curiosity, right? Like, what is it that's, and he didn't even answer me. He says, you're a libertarian. And I said, very pointedly, I will never forget what I said. I said, I don't say mean things to you. Why would you say such a horrible thing to me? And of course, we have a chuckle about that these days. Looking back on it, we realize we're both libertarians. Eventually, I left the Republican Party. I registered as a libertarian only about 15 years ago, but for all practical purposes, I've been a libertarian my whole life. I came to libertarianism from what I would call, arbitrarily speaking, the right-hand side. I came from the side that says the world works better, right? The economy is more efficient. People make better decisions when they're left alone, when the economy is left alone by the government, when there's less government intervention in our lives. That's what I call coming to it from the right-hand side. And it wasn't until later in life, maybe around the time I became a police officer. I became a police officer as a second career in 2010. It was around that time that I came to libertarianism also from what I would call the left-hand side, which is a recognition that this is going to sound a little weird. So work with me here. Okay. Imagine a thought experiment. Imagine that Hayek was wrong. Imagine that socialism worked. Work with me here a minute. Use your imagination, Clark, right? If the government could actually make better decisions for us, right? Would it be an ethical proposition for the government to do so? And the answer has got to be no, because it is not merely unethical to take away our rights to make whatever dumb decision we want, but it's also, in my view, and I think I come to this a little bit from the standpoint of faith, I think it's an obligation to pursue our lives by our own standards, to figure out what it is that we want to do with our lives, not merely which individual decisions, but how do we define success? How do we define happiness? How do we pursue that? How do we even go about figuring out what it is that life is all about? When you defer to anyone else, much less a government, right? When you defer to anyone else in terms of making decisions for you, you give up a piece of your humanity that I believe not only it's your right to hang on to, but I would go so far as to argue you have an obligation to hang on to all of your humanity and pursue life by your own standards. And so that's what I call coming to libertarianism from the left-hand side. I was a police officer for 11 and a half years in Broward County in South Florida. Second career from the age of 49 to 60, all as a registered libertarian, which, as you might imagine, leads to some interesting conversations. But I had a great experience. I was able to find a great police department with a separate vice unit, so I didn't have to get involved with all the stuff that I personally considered stupid, the war on drugs in particular, prostitution stings, all the stuff that I think is a waste of time. I was able to find a police department that didn't force me to get involved with all that. So I actually had a very, very good experience.
Okay, well, anyway, Mike, yeah, thanks for coming on. And I wanted to ask you, I know you've been running, I think, longer than any of the other presidential candidates, because I remember you, like, at least 2 years ago, were running. And so I assume you've talked to a lot of libertarians over that time, but have you also talked to members of the general public, and how have they reacted to your message and to your campaign?
It's really interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. I actually ran for Congress in 2021 in a special election, while still a cop, by the way. And I was campaigning mostly on a platform of, opposition to the mandates, masking mandates, vaccine mandates, opposition to school closure, the whole ball of wax coming out of the COVID regime, right? As an economist, opposing very strongly economic shutdowns and shutdowns of various social institutions, all of that. It was fascinating to see, first of all, how few people can even spell libertarianism, even know that the Libertarian Party exists. Those who do wouldn't be able to tell you what the Libertarian Party stands for, right? Fascinating. The other thing that was fascinating is that you come to the realization, in my experience, that most Americans have a libertarian streak. They wouldn't characterize it as such. They wouldn't call it my libertarian streak, right? But most Americans adhere to a set of values that better align with ours as a party than the values of the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. Most Americans get the idea. They might disagree with you, right? They might give you pushback here and there, but fundamentally, do they believe in the idea that you should be able to have choice in your life regarding medical procedures, regarding vaccines? Do they believe, more choice regarding where your kids go to school is a better idea than less choice? Do they believe that, taking money from people and using it to project military hegemony around the world just for the sake of it? Do they believe that's a good idea? No. And so it's really a matter of explanation. And you don't always get time, right? You don't get 15 minutes to explain the platform when you knock on someone's door usually. And if you do, that's fantastic. But passing out literature in the Walmart parking lot is typically a 25-second interaction. And so it can be pretty rough. but a lot of Americans are ready to hear our message.
Great.
Okay, well, and I think both Clark and I did want to ask you about following up on that, because again, like you've been campaigning a long time and your fellow candidates have been campaigning for a while too. What do you think about Donald Trump coming to the Libertarian National Convention and actually being invited by our national chair to be on stage after the Libertarian candidates debate? It seems kind of crazy, but what's your take as a candidate?
Oh, it is crazy. Speaking of guys who have campaigned for a long time, right? You're right. I've been campaigning for a couple of years. This guy feels like he's been campaigning for 10 years. I can't hardly remember when he wasn't. Look, I understand why the decision was made. You know, it's probably not a decision I would have personally made because I believe in reciprocity, and I'm going to be pushing the Republican Party to be inviting me to speak to their convention. And I would feel a lot better if we had that agreement in place before we just handed it over to him. I get why the decision was made. It will lead to some extra publicity. It will be an opportunity to impress upon him the extent to which we disagree. I think there's going to be some booing and shouting. I hope he comes with his ears open. I hope he comes to listen. This is a guy who very well could become president of the United States again. That makes him not unimportant, right? And so it would be nice if he were affected by the experience, positively or negatively. It would be nice if he learned something. At the very least, he could learn that the Libertarian Party is not having what he's selling. That would be an important thing for him to learn. If he could, by the way, I do realize that me wanting Donald Trump to be a good listener and learn from his experiences and take criticism to heart, I get how I sound, right? That might be asking for too big a bite of the apple. But in a perfect world, you would hope that he would be in some sense affected. At the very least, we want him to walk away saying, wow, that sucked. You know, why is it those people aren't having what I'm selling? What is the difference? What, you know, where is our mismatch, or where is our biggest mismatch? It would be nice if he at least had to question something. Now, what I fear is that, you know, it will be some extra publicity. That's fine. But what I fear is that it's not true that all publicity is good publicity. Normally we say, you know, almost all publicity is good publicity, right? But I do fear, and this is just a priori, you know, it may turn out after the fact that this doesn't happen. So I need to settle down and wait to see how it plays out. But what I fear is that he'll say something, however small, that the crowd likes, right? And that there's some cheering or clapping or acceptance indicated. And that'll turn out to be the 6-second soundbite, right? That gets played on social media. And then he runs around making the case, libertarians like me. You know, this proves I'm a libertarian. This proves that I'm on the right side of these arguments. And that would be a shame, both because it's just untrue, but it would also be a shame because it would be a mischaracterization of our party. People could get the wrong impression. People come away from that sort of thing thinking, well, is Libertarian Party MAGA? You know, is it really a pro-Trump organization? And of course, few things could be further from the truth than that. So I worry. I worry.
Okay, Clark.
Yeah, speaking of presidential candidates, Mike, I happen to think that this year, 2024, the LP, the Libertarian Party, has a number of great candidates, of course, including you. And I have been to your website, MikeTerMaat.com, MikeTerMaat.com. You've got a great website and great issues, but let me go ahead and let you explain the Gold New Deal and basically why you think you're the best of the LP candidates. And of course, you know, the issues that you really want to push this year in your campaign.
Sure. I appreciate that. There's a lot to unpack there. Two different questions. Let me go in reverse order because I think that our campaign is the one that people are going to want to support because we're set up for success. We're set up to actually disrupt the political duopoly that is represented by the Republican Party and the Democratic Party this year. We're set up for success in the sense that we have two things going for us that are extremely important and in a way that differentiates us from the other campaigns and differentiates us from campaigns in the past. And number one is that very unapologetically principled platform, the Gold New Deal. We'll talk about that. And the other one is we bring a lot of credibility to the table. As anyone who knows, who pays attention to our, thank you for the website plug, our social media, our print material, our on-site presentations, we work very hard at building and maintaining our credibility. And that means explaining how we're going to do certain things, sometimes explaining the detail, what things mean, what the implications are, why we're proposing the propositions that we are. The Gold New Deal includes some of the most transformational ideas in libertarian thought. And so you got to run with a lot of credibility. I also believe that that credibility is what is so important in terms of getting attention from voters, from the media, from donors, right? If you're not clearing that threshold of credibility, people aren't going to pay any attention. It is, after all, a competition. It's not a philosophy lecture, it's a competition. So if you're not in it to win it, why would anyone pay attention? And I do believe that our ideas as libertarians deserve a great deal of attention. And to get it means running with a lot of credibility. So we lean very hard into my own personal background in public service and public policy. Now, you asked about the Gold New Deal. Yes, it's a collection of some of the most transformational ideas. To some libertarians, it might seem a little bit like bread and butter. But once we get on the other side of Memorial Day, it's going to blow a lot of hair back. For example, it's all designed to change the relationship between us and government, right? It's to roll back the New Deal of FDR. Obviously, the name is making a little bit of fun of AOC's Green New Deal, right? We believe we need a fundamentally different style of relationship between us and government. So, for example, we believe that we need to get rid of the IRS, not just because it's an agency we love to hate, which I suppose it is, but we believe that the relationship, a direct financial relationship between the federal government and individuals, it's wholly inappropriate. Anyone who's ever been audited, as I have, knows that's a weird and imbalanced relationship, right? And I believe that it's one of the reasons why the federal government keeps spending so much money, because they can raise taxes, because that relationship is imbalanced. In theory, Congress would stand up for us, but they don't. And so I believe that the remedy there is to force the federal government to go to states to get the money, not come directly to us as individuals. We need states to stand up for our interests, and that's not happening right now. And a great deal of the Gold New Deal is spinning out power from the federal government to states. We believe that states need a vehicle by which to opt out of federal supremacy, to resolve conflicts between state law and federal law in state court, in effect, to nullify disagreements at the federal level, to nullify federal supremacy, to nullify federal legislation that goes against what the state believes is acceptable. We want states to be able to chart their own political futures. In some sense, it's a restatement of the 10th Amendment, but the 10th Amendment has gone by the wayside. So we're trying to get back to some of the founding principles on which this country's government was supposed to be based. So those are a couple of the ideas. But the other big ideas, individual autonomy, corporate autonomy, the government leaving you alone, a lighter regulatory touch. And as important, and I believe this may well be finally the year in which foreign policy plays a major role. I know I keep saying that every 4 years, but this time I mean it. Foreign policy may rise to the top in terms of important issues. I believe that we need a libertarian-minded administration that refuses military conflict without an act of war being declared. I would further go so far as to say an act of war should require the approval of the majority of the states. That's how important it is. It is the most important decision a government can make. The fact that the administration can make these decisions willy-nilly is bad. The fact that succeeding administrations have made these decisions willy-nilly is horrific. And I believe that the foreign policy that has been pursued by the United States government for generations has made us less safe, not more safe. And I think Americans are ready for that message.
Well, to follow up on that then, Mike, so obviously it's a good idea for there to be a declaration of war before U.S. troops are being sent anywhere to fight. But you're saying that it's okay if there's a declaration of war, but how does that jive with a non-interventionist foreign policy where we don't really want a war, whether there's a declaration or not?
The point is to make it as difficult as possible to conduct a military intervention. We need changes in place to outlive a libertarian-minded administration, right? Yes, if I were in power, if one of the other libertarians were, if a libertarian-minded Republican or Democrat, I don't see any in existence, but if one were to exist and ascend to the White House, you'd feel pretty good for those 4 years. You'd feel like you had a fighting chance to unwind our military hegemonic positioning, right? To bring the troops home, to close bases, to get out of NATO, to unwind our commitment to Taiwan, to shut down foreign aid, to unwind our relationship with Israel, as much as I love Israel. You would have a fighting chance to accomplish all this. But more importantly still is leaving the system changed so that subsequent administrations would find it more difficult to go to war. I believe it has been far too easy to go to war, and that's part of our problem. Republicans have come and gone. Democrats have come and gone. But the one thing they seem to all have in common is that they love war. So how do we make it more difficult? How do we change the system to make it more difficult to go to war?
Yes, and in fact, I think you know this, Mike, but the last time Congress declared war was 82 years ago, June 1942. I think June 5th, 1942, when they declared war. It was, of course, after Germany and Japan, of course, had attacked Pearl Harbor 6 months before. And yet the U.S. today, here we sit with we've got these two great oceans on either side, and we've got Mexico on one side and Canada on the other side, and the people love us. They want to come here. Many of them want to come here, and they've never invaded the U.S. In fact, the U.S. has invaded Mexico, and the U.S. invaded Canada. So no, I agree completely. And as it stands, though, the U.S. still spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. And what is it, Ted? I think we have bases in over 600 countries, all without a declaration of war. So yeah, I mean, we're against all of that, all of us here in this room. But obviously we should make it harder. I mean, that's crazy. We have all this going on, all these trillions of dollars being spent on defense, and yet again, no declaration of war since in 82 years.
Well, you put your finger right on it. And I think that what that highlights, Clark, is the idea that the people who have been making these decisions, right, the elected politicians and bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats and elected politicians, the people who have been making these decisions, they operate with a different set of values than you do. They have a different set of ethics than the typical American. I often say, and I don't mean this to sound quite as glib as it's going to come out, but work with me. If you were to drop a baseball off the Empire State Building and chose the President of the United States by giving it to the first person who picked up that baseball, you would very likely have someone who better aligned with American values than the people who are making these decisions for us. You ask most people on the street, you talk about the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. Is that something you would have done? Would you have stayed there for 20 years? Would you have propagated that war, killing over 1 million people? Would you have spent $2 trillion? Is that what you would have done? these decisions that are made in our name with our money, all too often with our young people's lives, these decisions do not align with our values. They do not reflect what we would do if we were in power as individuals, as Americans. That's how you know that these people operate for cause in the shadows. The reason they operate behind closed doors is because they know darn well that what they're doing are things that you wouldn't do, that you don't appreciate, that are not in your interest. And by the way, ethics aside, values aside, if you were to ask most Americans, give me your number one example of a military intervention that you think was a good idea. You know, the type, you know, it cost us $1 billion, cost us a few thousand lives, but it was a good idea anyway. Go ahead, give me the example. It just isn't there. In other words, as an empirical matter, never mind ethics and values and principles, just as an empirical, just objectively speaking, the foreign policy of the United States does not result in strategic accomplishments that most Americans would consider in our long-term interest. It just doesn't happen.
Okay.
And so for all of these reasons, I think that people are ready for our message.
Well, now that brings up the next question then about how hard it is to get the libertarian message out there when we get so ignored by the media. And here we have a very close, probably close election between the Democrat and Republican. And there's the major third-party candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's going to suck up some of the air on being an alternative. So where does that leave you? Say you're the Libertarian nominee. How do you get attention for the Libertarian platform that you're presenting?
Tell the truth, be Libertarian, and remember, because you need to differentiate from the others, remember that because the race is going to be so close, and because it's going to be all mixed up with Bobby Kennedy in it, really mixed up with us in it, it's going to be a four-way race. It's going to be very hard to predict. 1%, 2% here or there could make a world of difference. Are we going to matter? Oh my Lord, we're going to matter. A lot of people are going to be mad at us. A lot of people are going to be mad at Bobby Kennedy, right? I get that. All the more reason to lean into your principles. That's your backstop. By the way, the reason the Gold New Deal has its own website and its own URL, this is our pledge that we're not backing up, right? This is our platform. I mean, really, who names their platform? It's not a dog, right? So, I mean, this is our commitment, that this is what we're running on, and we're running on it all the way through November. I believe that it is the right thing to do, both in terms of properly branding our party, right? For the sake of down ballot candidates, for the sake of future candidates. And we all know the Valley Libertarian Party brand is approximately 0. It is the right thing to do to brand the party. It is also the right thing to do, even if you didn't care about even if all you cared about was maximizing votes, maximizing media attention, maximizing big donor support. It would still be the right thing to do to run an unapologetically principled platform, to completely differentiate from Republicans and completely differentiate from Democrats. You have to be a starkly differentiated choice. You need to plant that flag of libertarianism and raise it high. People will find you. They will find you if you present a different choice. If you present something that is reminiscent of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, why? Why are you wasting our time? Why are you in this, right? It drives me insane to think about how many times in the past libertarians have said, oh, you know, we're fiscally conservative like Republicans and socially liberal like Democrats. I'm sorry, close your mouth. You are not helping us. For one thing, it's not even true, right? We're actually fiscally conservative. We're actually socially liberal. So to compare yourself with those other parties is neither honest nor helpful in a marketing sense. We need to completely differentiate, to cleave a very hard edge against each one of those parties, to seek common ground with their voters, absolutely, but not with their politicians.
Okay,
Great.
Clark.
Well, listen, yeah, let's see. We're winding down to our last few minutes here. So let's see. Should we let Jim come in and brag on Mike some? Jim?
Oh,
I
if
should
he
brag
wants to.
on Jim some. Jim is our campaign manager, an elected official in Altamont Springs, Florida. And you don't have a whole lot of city commissioners who are tried and true libertarians elected around the United States. And in a place like Florida, where it is a lot of red and blue competition, right? And Jim is a multiple time elected chairman of the LNC. So he has more experience campaigning for libertarians than probably any human alive, come to think of it. That just occurred to me. I wonder if that may be true. That may be true.
I don't know. I'm not ready for Mount Rushmore, but you might be, Mike. Yeah, I'm an old guy, so when I see Mike, I think I like Mike because when I was growing up, it was I like Ike. Is the presidential motto. So we're stealing that and using it from Eisenhower. Yeah, Mike is the best candidate we have, in my opinion. So that's why I endorsed him and started working with his campaign over a year ago now, I think, or I don't remember it so long ago, Mike, but anyway, it was a long time ago. So I was honored that he asked me to come on full time and work on the campaign. And but the reason I immediately said I want to support Mike ter Maat is because I think he has the credibility, just look at him. That's number one, compared to all of our other candidates. He looks the most presidential, and that's important to a lot of voters. You've got to get over some of these simple things to get through to people. And so the other thing, of course, is his outstanding resume. And as if all that wasn't good enough, you've just heard him explain his positions and who he is for a half hour here, and he is very capable communicator. So those are three solid reasons why I think the Libertarian Party should nominate Mike ter Maat for our presidential candidate this year, because, and you'll hear me say this a lot if you hang around me, we need to continue to be a credible alternative for voters to consider. They're not ready to consider voting for us yet, but they do believe we're there. They understand we're a credible alternative. So we really do need to do that branding Mike was talking about and remain credible to them so that they will start considering us for their vote. And when the tipping point comes and they start considering us for their vote, we're going to start winning more elections. We're going to start getting higher vote totals even when we don't win. And more people are going to start paying attention to us, especially those who make public policy. And that's what I do, as Mike was saying, but just here in my city, and it's been an honor to serve now in my fourth term. So I'm actually doing it, and I'm helping Mike do it.
Well, great. Well, that's a great way to wrap this up. And actually, Mike, let's give you a few, maybe 20 seconds to just tell people where they can find you online. We mentioned your website, but yeah, you did tell us the other places.
Yeah, go to, I appreciate that. MikeTerMaat.com is the basic campaign website, but it is kind of hard to spell because ter Maat's got 2 A's in it. Look, goldnewdeal.org is easier to spell. It's org, not .com. Goldnewdeal.org is where the platform lives, and the two websites go back and forth. And as long as I've got 3 seconds left, we've got a very nice third website that is a tremendous amount of fun. We have an AI bot up and running at libertarianintelligence.org. We call it Lisa, the Libertarian Intelligence System application. Lisa answers questions the way a libertarian would. It's a vehicle to spread libertarian thought and solutions and philosophy, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, great. Well, listen, gentlemen, thanks so much for appearing on the show. And let me just remind everyone that tyranny exists when the people fear the government. Liberty exists when the government fears the people.